Hi, and thanks for joining me today on Away From It All TV. I'm Roland Yarborough, and we're going to continue today our series entitled Fire University. As you know, we've been talking about the ferrocerium rod because aside from open flame sources of ignition, it's the most dependable and longest lasting, effective, and easiest to use way to start a fire. We started our first video episode just by introducing the ferrocerium rod as if the viewer knows nothing about it, and then we moved to the second one, which was different strikers you can use to remove material from the rod and effect those molten globs of metal that burn from 3,000 to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. There also now seems to be a whole lot of controversy in the bushcraft and outdoor survival community about the best way to actually strike a ferro rod. How do you do it? How do you strike the rod? What's the best way? Well, to cut to the chase, we here at Away From It All TV believe the best way to strike a ferrocerium rod is the way in which your circumstances demand it. In other words, you use the striking technique that is most appropriate for the situation you find yourself in. And we're going to be talking about and demonstrating different ways to strike a ferrocerium rod today on Away From It All TV. So stay with me, we're going to get right to it. Alright, as you know, any sharp-edged object that is harder than the soft metal of a ferrocerium rod will work to remove material and make sparks. But how do you do that? There's a lot of different ways to do it. As I just demonstrated, there's the big, long stroke that removes a whole bunch of material. You see people on TV sometimes and they're doing these little small strokes like that, and they're producing small sparks intentionally. I've seen people anchor the rod and drive sparks down. I've seen them anchor the knife or the striker and pull the rod away. That will work. I've seen people use an angled strike to push the sparks one direction or the other, and that will work as well. But it just depends on the situation that you're in. I have a bundle here of processed tulip poplar bark, and it's real damp out here, and it's been sitting out here for a few minutes while I was getting ready to film this. I can actually feel the moisture that has crept into this tulip poplar. Now, there are a lot of different ways to ignite this, but in my opinion, for a ball of shredded inner bark, the best way to do it is to anchor the rod and just simply drive the material down into the ball of tinder. Just like that, and you've got fire. Okay? Now, will this work, if we pat that out and turn it over, will this work, I better hurry up, with a big shower of sparks like this, and you hold it right here and just shower it down? Well, sure it will. It reignited again. And if I pat that out and remove some of that, this is getting kind of difficult to do. I probably should have had more than one little bird nest here, but it'll suffice to prove it. How about if I hold the knife here and drag the ferro rod beside it? Will that work? Well, yes, it will. You can see that right there. So I'm going to remove this, stomp it out over there. What about this fat lighter here? So you see, all three approaches will work with a ball of inner bark. It's not necessarily about which one's the best. And I would encourage you not to get yourself stuck in a camp where you can only strike the ferro rod one way, because there are situations where a different approach might be viable. If you want to know how to do this, find you a nice piece of fat wood and take the spine of your knife and just anchor it and just scrape off some what I call little scrapings. These aren't really shavings, they're just scrapings. And I'll tell you something about fat lighter. Don't do this and then carry this around in a container
because the pine sap will slowly somehow evaporate out of this, and you'll find it's not nearly as effective as just carrying a piece of fat wood, and as you need it, remove it and use it. It won't evaporate nearly as bad when it's in a solid piece like that. Now in this situation, you can use a ferrocerium rod to affect fire here, and the way you do that, I like to just anchor the rod and drive sparks down into it. And you don't have to have a lot for this. You can see right there, you've got fire. Something else you may want to remember when you're using a ferrocerium rod, if you have material like even plastics, or material that's a little bit damp, or material that's just not easy to catch with a ferro rod, there's a technique where you can take the spine of your knife and with very slow strokes you can remove some material off of your ferro rod just with some very slow strokes. And in a minute here, I'm probably going to hit this rod a little too hard and it's going to ignite. What you can do is you can remove the material without igniting it and let it pile up in one spot. And now that you've got a little piece of material, now I'm going to strike this because you've got a little area there about the size of a quarter where you've got some material that's kind of concentrated in one area. And when you ignite it, you're going to get a whole bunch of globs of metal that are burning at about 5,000 degrees. And whatever medium you're trying to ignite, watch this. So that's going to give you a lot better option to ignite that material than just shooting flames in it directly, because that'll sit there and burn for a few seconds. And though it burned for only a few seconds, those few seconds, it's pretty intense if you were down in there in it. So remember that about a ferro rod. And I'm going to show you one more thing that will really help you long term if you found yourself in a long-term sustainable situation with how to make your ferro rod last a long time. Here at Away From It All TV, we encourage people to remember the ABCDs of fire. Assemble your material, build a fire, char something, dry something. In vein of drying something, I have a container here that has some charred material in it. You know, I'm a big believer in charred material. There's some char cloth and just a few scraps down there in the corner of some charred punk wood. I want to show you how charred material relates to a ferrocerium rod. Every time you strike a ferrocerium rod, you're consuming it because you're removing material from the rod. In time, no matter how big the rod is, in time it will go away. It will be used up because you're consuming it. Every time you strike it, you're removing material. That material is gone. It's irretrievably lost. So if you were in a more semi-permanent situation or a long-term scenario in the out of doors, survival perhaps, or you just decided long-term sustainable is what you wanted to do, how would you make a ferrocerium rod last as long as possible? Well, the answer is to use it in conjunction with charred material. I've got some char cloth in here and a little tiny bit of punk wood over there. Most of you know from experience, with solar magnification, you can light this in 3 seconds, and that char cloth is gonna go in 3 seconds with a good magnifying glass. But on a day like today, when there's hardly any sun, you're not going to be able to accomplish that nearly as easily. Well, what if you don't have one? And we're talking about ferro rods. With a flint and steel, you may have to hit this 10, 12, 15, 20 times to get a spark to light on there and ignite it. Might do it the first time, might not. But with a ferro rod, it's virtually going to ignite a piece of char cloth the first time you do it, every time. And I'll demonstrate that for you right now. See, I just hit that one time, and you can see there's you can see that real well right there. We've got an ignited, burning piece of char material, okay? Well, that's hot. The same thing is true of punk wood, all right? I'm gonna hit this punk wood in the corner here, and just with that, I've got several pieces in there. See that? Instantly. Now, well, some of these got caught out here too. I'm gonna put this back before I burn up all my charred material. Close this up, and that'll conserve some of that resource. The significance of that is this: with one strike of a ferro rod, you can almost always catch charred material. Now, the downside of it is charred material becomes an ember, which you have to put into a bird nest and then blow into flame. So you have to weigh out, do I have enough of this? Am I going to be out here long enough? Do I have enough bird nest material? Do I have enough char material? What's my best option going to be? This is the source of your spark. My opinion is, if you're going to have a long-term sustainable situation, make you some charred material. And if everybody thinks char cloth, I prefer punk wood, because punk wood is easily findable out in the wild of the landscape. It's a renewable resource. If you know what to look for: a rotten log, rotten standing stump that's dead, rotten, but not wet, dry and spongy. And that's the secret to good charred punk wood, is it needs to be light and spongy. Now here's the trick. Flint and steel will ignite the spongy, light, excellent top shelf A-grade punk wood that you've charred. It'll ignite that every time. So will solar magnification. But a ferro rod, if you find some less than perfect punk wood that's a little bit too hard, a little bit too crusty, your ferro rod will ignite that almost every time with one strike, because the metal is so much hotter, the embers burn so much hotter than flint and steel. So instead of an 800-degree spark, you've got a 3,000 to 5,000-degree spark. That'll catch stuff that a flint and steel won't. So remember that when you're looking for punk wood. And if you're in a long-term sustainable situation, I'm going to abandon the notion of char cloth pretty quickly, because I don't want to use up that valuable resource. And I'm going to go find something that's renewable, like punk wood. So to wrap this up, there are a lot of different ways to strike a ferro rod. You can do the big shower of sparks, and sometimes you might need that. You can anchor the rod, drive sparks down into your target material. You can anchor your hand, pull the ferro rod back. You can strike from this angle. You can strike from this angle to target the sparks one side or the other. You can remove material slowly and ignite those with a spark after the fact. You can come down to the end of your rod and just give it some sparks like that. And you can get little tiny sparks like that that'll burn a lot of tinders. So there are a lot of different ways to strike a ferro rod. And our philosophy on it here at Away From It All is, you strike the rod in the way that the situation you're in demands it. Strike the ferro rod in the way that is most appropriate to help you affect fire, using the material and in the situation that you find yourself in. Hope this has been helpful to you. Hey, appreciate the views. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to our channel, and hey, get out there. Take somebody with you. Get away from it all, where dreams are restored in the great outdoors. Hi, this is Roland Yarborough with Away From Hi, this is Roland Yarborough with Away From It. What is wrong with my voice? Hi, this is Roland Yarborough with Away From It All TV. Yeah. Hi, this is Roland Yarborough with Away From It All TV, and thanks for joining us today. We're continuing our series called Fire University, and we've been talking about the ferrocerium rod. First two episodes dealt with what the ferrocerium rods were, and the second one is how to... Hi, and thank you for joining me today. This is Roland Yarborough. Hi, and welcome to Away From It All TV. I'm Roland Yarborough, and I appreciate you joining me today for another episode in Fire University. Hi, this is Roland Yarborough with Away From It All. Something else you may want to consider adding to your repertoire of ferro rod use is that when you've got a medium of tinder that is not readily flammable and is not just easy to start with a ferro rod, there's something that you can do. You can take the spine of your knife and you can anchor your rod, and you can begin to remove very slowly with slow strokes. You can begin to remove little pieces, tiny particles of your ferrocerium material. Oh, and see, I ignited it by accident. But if you do that, it's hard to do without getting carried away with it. But if you'll just remove some pieces of ferrocerium material with some slow strikes, then on plastic or damp tinder stuff that's you can see that once you strike that, it produces a whole lot of those heavy sparks in a targeted area, and many times that can help you start stubborn tinders that aren't readily available to catch with a ferrocerium rod. Scratch all that.